In this video, we'll investigate the era of good feelings and the Panic of 1819. James Monroe was nominated for the presidency in 1816 by the Republicans. They undertook to continue the so-called Virginia dynasty of Washington, Jefferson, and Madison. The fading Federalists ran a candidate for the last time in their history, and he was crushed by 183 electoral votes to 34. And they left the field to the triumphant Republicans and one-party rule. James Monroe straddled two generations, the bygone age of the Founding Fathers, which had now ended, and the emergent age of nationalism. He was a very intellectual and personal force, and really the least distinguished for the first 8 presidents. It was sometimes called for a sober administration. Monroe was an experienced, level-headed executive with a talent for interpreting people. The emerging nationalism was further cemented by a goodwill tour that Monroe undertook in 1817, and he received a heartwarming welcome, basically, when he went out to inspect military defenses. This is the era of good feelings, and a Boston newspaper kind of gave the era that name, and they announced it as the era of good feelings, which was a term to describe the administrations of Monroe. The era of good feelings, though, was somewhat of a misnomer. The period was actually a very troubled period in history. The acute issues of the tariff, the bank, internal improvements, and the sale of public lands was being hotly contested around the United States population. Sectionalism was crystallizing, and the conflict over slavery was beginning to become apparent. Much of the goodness went out of the good feelings in 1819, when a paralyzing economic panic descended. It brought with it deflation, depression, bankruptcies, bank failures, unemployment, soup kitchens, and overcrowded pest houses known as debtors' prisons. This was the first national financial panic since President Washington had taken office. Many factors contributed to the catastrophe of 1819, but looming large was over-speculation in frontier lands. The Bank of the United States, through its western branches, had become deeply involved in this popular type of outdoor gambling. Financial paralysis from the panic, which lasted in some degree for several years, gave a setback to the nationalistic feeling, and the West was especially hard hit. The Bank of the United States forced the speculative Western banks to the wall and foreclosed mortgages on countless farms, which was legal but a very unwise thing to do. The Panic of 1819 created backwashes in the political and social world. The poorer classes were severely strapped, and in their troubles were sown the seeds of Jacksonian democracy. Hard times also directed attention to the inhumanity of imprisoning debtors, people who owed money or could not pay their debts. In extreme cases, often overplayed, mothers were torn for their infants for owing a few dollars. Mounting agitation against imprisonment for debt started some remedial legislation in some states. The West is going to continue to grow, and the onward march of the West continues as 9 frontier states had joined the original 13 between 1791 and 1819. There was an eye on preserving the north-south sectional balance, and most of these Commonwealth lands had been admitted alternately free of slavery. In part, it was a continuation of the generations-old westward movement, which had been going on since the colonial days and had special appeal to European immigrants. Eager newcomers from abroad were beginning to stream down in impressive numbers, especially after the war of boycotts and bullets, land exhaustion in the older tobacco states, where the soil had been mined, and that all drove people westward. The soil in the South calling it mined meant that it was not as fertile as it once had been. Acute economic distress during the embargo years turned many pinched faces towards the setting sun. The crushing of the Indians in the Northwest and South by Generals Harrison and Jackson pacified the frontier, made made settlers feel like they would be safe if they moved west, and opened up large, untouched tracts of land. The building of highways improved the land routes to the Ohio River Valley. Noteworthy was the Cumberland Road, which was begun in 1811 and went from Maryland to Illinois. The use of the first steamboat on western waters happened in 1811 and heralded a new an era of being able to navigate going upstream against the current. But the West, despite the inflow of settlers, was still weak in population and in influence, and was not potent enough to be politically a rival for the North or South. And so basically, it was forced to ally itself with the other sections. The West demanded cheap acreage and partially achieved its goal in the Land Act of 1820, which authorized a buyer to purchase 80 acres at a minimum of $1.25 an acre. The West also demanded cheap transportation and slowly got the transportation despite the constitutional qualms of the presidents and the hostilities of the Easterners. Finally, the West demanded cheap money, issued by its own wildcat banks, and sought the powerful Bank of the United States to attain its goal. You can see the westward expansion of the United States on this map. There were key routes of exploration and settlement during that time period. The route in blue was the route that Lewis and Clark took as they left from St. Louis, Missouri, and headed out to the Pacific Ocean to find a new route. The Santa Fe Trail, indicated in purple, can be seen stretching also from St. Louis, Missouri, down into the western states. The Oregon Trail, in 1841, can be seen leaving also from St. Louis, Missouri, and going all the way out to the Pacific. The Pony Express in 1860 is indicated by the maroon line, and then the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869 can be seen represented by the orange line. We'll discuss westward expansion and the state of the country following the era of good feelings more in class.